Yeah, Dr. Alex Duval, can you hear me now properly?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Alex Duval. We are really glad to have you as, you accept our interview today. So, Dr. Alex Duval is a World Peace Foundation, he's from Fletcher School. Alex Duval is executive director of the World Peace Foundation and a research professor at the Fletcher School at Tufa University. Considered one of the foremost experts on Sudan and the Horn of Africa. His scholarship and practice has also probed humanitarian crisis and respond, human rights, HIV, and good governance in Africa, and conflict and peace building. We are really, really glad to have you as a guest, Mr. Alex Duval.
It's a pleasure to be with you, and sorry it has taken so long for me to join.
It's okay, sir. So let's first put in historical perspective the nation state building in Ethiopia, starting from Menelik to Haile Selassie, Dirk, EPRDF, and now what's happening. As you know, one of the social scientists, Max Weber, defined the modern state as a community that successfully claims a monopoly over violence within a geographical area which require it to have legitimate, this is a key word, and legal authority. So can you please shed light on that and put grounded in historical perspective the nation-state building of Ethiopia?
I think we need to see the emergence of the Ethiopian state in the late 19th century as an imperial enterprise. Under the Ethiopian emperors in the northern highlands, Johannes and Menelik, it was a junior partner in the scramble for Africa. The Ethiopian emperors had no real objection to colonialism, provided they could be part of it. And so the expansion of the Ethiopian empire, and it was explicitly an empire, it was based upon a racial hierarchy, it was based upon conquest and the right given to those who conquered and therefore settled by force the peripheries. It was an imperial project that bears comparison with the Egyptian project in the Nile Valley and the European projects elsewhere in Africa. And it survived throughout the colonial period with that ethno-racial and also religious hierarchy intact, and with a mode of governance that was not, in the terms of Max Weber, whom you quoted, was not a legal, rational, bureaucratic mode of power based upon the consent of the governed according to a set of constitutional and legal norms. It fundamentally rested on the forceful incorporation of diverse communities under the emperor. And even when Eritrea was incorporated in 1952,
yes,
it was a unique federation because it was federated under the Ethiopian crown. So clearly a hierarchy was built into that. And it was a fundamentally unsustainable system. And one of the problems that we have in Ethiopia today is that some members of the educated elites and the ruling class have never come to terms with the end of that era. They have never come to terms with the need to decolonize the understanding of what Ethiopia is. So they have a vision of, let's go back to the past glories of Ethiopia, when Ethiopia stood tall among the nations, in the same way that some of the leaders of my country, the United Kingdom, think we can go back to the British Empire. And that when the British Empire was at its height, the colonized peoples of India and Africa and elsewhere loved the colonizer. It's complete nonsense. And the idea that an Ethiopian identity could be created, could be imposed, and would universally be welcomed is simply not borne out by the facts.
As you know, Dr. Alex, you and other thinkers, such as one of the social scientists also, Zahra Wang, wrote in her thesis, Ethnicity and Power in Ethiopia. And just for the sake of the time, I'm just coming right now during the 1991 when the EPRDF took the power. And she's saying here, ethnicity was introduced as a basis for the reconstitution of the Ethiopian state in 1991. And examining the politicization of ethnic identity before and after the federation of the countries, nation and nationality and people was instituted. My question is, it seems right now the core crisis between these two school of thoughts, which is unitarists, those who are, as you say last time also in other, in social media, there is an old empire that is dead. Then they trying to revive it, to reinstate, which is led by right now the Abiy, which is unitarist, and the other group such as TPLF, Oromo Liberation Front, the Ogaden others who are fighting, to keep it. And as you say today, the irony is Abiy is trying to destroy, and before, during the 70s, it was other way around. Can you, precisely, shed light on this school of thoughts and how they bring today's crisis in Ethiopia?
Well, during the revolution of 1974 and thereafter, there were those who wanted to maintain a strong, centralized authority, including a revolutionary authority. Those for whom the primary question in Ethiopia was the nationalities question, was the governance of diversity. And then there was the sort of the radical Republicans, if you like, who believed in that if the center were to be controlled by a truly radical revolutionary agenda, all this could be accommodated. And one of the tragedies of Ethiopian history is the forceful elimination of that third strand during the Red Terror, the complete destruction of that intelligentsia. So that those who were members of that, the EPRP especially, either had to move into the unitarist camp and become of one with those who believed in that imperial project. And some of them then resurfaced, especially around the 2005 election, making common cause with their former oppressors, or they had to go into the federalist camp. And so that when the EPRDF under TPLF leadership took power in 1991, bringing the OLF rather belatedly into a coalition, the only formula that would keep Ethiopia together was the ethno-federalist formula. And that's what they went for. The great problem with that formula was, well, there were two problems. One was that any attempt to define ethnicity in a very static way and draw those boundaries and say to anyone, you are an Oromo or you are an Amhara, you can't be a bit of both, was always going to or for other ethnicities similarly, was going to have a problem. It wasn't able to breathe in terms of allowing for the evolution of people's identity as the country developed and as new generations got educated and so on. But the other problem with it was that the EPRDF in power, while respecting the cultural and linguistic rights of the different nations and nationalities, did not democratize the system. So it became a ethno-federal liberation in name only. And a new generation came up that said, this isn't good enough. It isn't good enough to be taught in our own language, to have an element of control over our state budgets, etc., etc. We want, our share of power at the center, which they were being denied. And that was the demise. That was what destroyed the EPRDF. And when that EPRDF was destroyed, all the other issues came up as well. And for a moment, of course, it looked as though Abiy was going to be able to placate all these constituencies. And there was a huge, enthusiasm about this man who it seemed was going to be everything to anyone. to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the problem of being a politician who overpromises is you then need to decide who to disappoint.
Mm-hmm.
And he first of all disappointed the Oromos, then the Tigrayans, and now he seems to just be living from week to week, trying to stay in power, placate all the constituencies that he has roused up, putting out fires here and there, and really incapable of managing the Ethiopian state and not managing the forces that he has unleashed in the last few years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. That I mean, as you say, although EPRDF has written one of the classical, even the late Mullah Zanawi used to say, we get it from the United Nations, such as, Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all the different, the most progressive, even what we consider as a more the left side, like what is happening right now in Chile or in Colombia, those countries, although he was claiming, and the EPRDF was claiming that, but from 2015 to 2018, the Oromo, the largest, they, although, as you say, I will quote you, also, although you were arguing that, or you were stating that Oromo has, they have written this classical, and they talk, they participate a lot in this area. So what went wrong? A lot of people are arguing today. Even Zaira Vanguard that I was saying, she was saying that here. The architect of ethnic federalism are influenced by Marxist formulation of the national question, which incorporate contradictory element, although inherited of the notion of granting self-determination. But the conviction that self-community, here is the key, the self-community respond better to mobilization from within. Okay, that is for the nation, nationality, and the people with their own language, by their own, nations. But the problem is when they come implementation, they are adding this, that the notion ethnic group are susceptible to identification definition. And here is the key, from above by a vanguard party applying a checklist and externally verifiable criteria.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think we saw the phenomenon emerge in the Soviet Union of what my colleague in Makele, Mulugeta Gebre-Hiwot, has called administrative nationalism. So you have an administrative template which is imposed upon a society, and then you try and form the nations and the national sentiment around that administrative formula. That is not going to work. And it's not going to work because it is centrally directed, and because it is too rigid. It doesn't allow for the flexibility that comes with historical change. None of these nations and nationalities are fixed. They change over time and in response to circumstances. And so when and I think it's inevitable at the moment that Ethiopia will have to go back to some sort of constitutional discussion based upon the existing constitution of 1994 and its concept of an ethno-federal system. As Ethiopians go back to that discussion, they need not only to examine the enormous shortcomings, the failings of the centralized option, but also how the federal system itself needs to be redesigned to take account of these new realities, so that it's much more democratic and much more flexible in response to changing realities.
Before we come back and talk about the current situation in Ethiopia, there is a last point that I would like to ask you. John Markakis, who has written recently a book called Ethiopia, The Last Two Frontiers, he's always arguing that, the central versus the periphery. Always, as yourself, you were arguing last time, the people from the north, especially the binary, the Tigrayans and the Amhara, they used to rule for so long and they were fighting on the power. Now the Oromo come, although you say there is a vacuum of leadership there and that they have to step in. And also the other peripheries, such as Somalis, such as Gambela, in Benishangul, are not part and parcel in the power, sharing. What do you think? Do you agree on the concept that still, there is a dichotomy, between the central and the south, which is most of the resource also is there, and the crisis is emanating from that area?
One of the features of the different crises that we have seen, political crises that we've seen in Ethiopia, is that they have been very much articulated among several dominant blocs based in the highlands, which actually include many of the Oromos too.
Yes.
And essentially the people of the margins, Benishangul, Gambela, the southernmost people, the Afars, the Somalis, and some of the Oromos were really second class in this whole system. And each of them had its own particular configuration of tensions and crises over land, over control of resources, over who should be given the full set of rights to govern those localities. And if there is a new political settlement that essentially reconfigures power among the highland blocs, one of the dangers is that it will reproduce those center-periphery relations that John Markakis was so critical of, and the system will generate a new round of instability there, because people in those peripheries have experienced the existential threat to them as communities arising from the overweening power of the highlands, and they have seen the vulnerability, the collapse of that imperial status in the highlands, and they won't tolerate it any longer. That's not a normative statement. That's just surely a fact. So the challenge of keeping Ethiopia together and redesigning the federation is going to have to take a lot more account of these what we used to call emerging regions some few years ago. Much more account needs to be taken of them than was the case when the federal constitution was designed some 30 years ago.
If I come back, you have written some excellent articles this month, and if I'm not conflated my words, I really I'm very impressed the way you put it, nicely, your analysis, and eloquently, putting there, although some Amara elites that I was couldn't believe it. Even you were arguing one time that the coalition that has been made, the 9, coalition, which is you consider in your words OPEC, they have to be also included. My question is, there was one article, your recent article, that caught my eyes. U.S. diplomacy failing at critical moment in Ethiopian war. And there are 3 elements there that I would like to discuss with you. First is the United Nations. There was a human rights group, that led by a Kenyan lady, an American, and Sri Lankans, and they just, they make reports. Can you talk about that? If that will, implement it in the long run, or it's just, as they used to say, is a piper tiger on the pepper?
Well, I think the 2 key elements for me that jumped out in this report is, one is they complained that the United Nations staff in Ethiopia had not cooperated with them. And I think that is significant. So the UN in Ethiopia is not impartial in this. The second is that they said, yes, all parties to the conflict. They didn't address Eritrea. Eritrea is outside their mandate. But all parties to the conflict in northern Ethiopia have committed abuses that appear to be war crimes. But only one side has committed the war crime of starvation, and only one side has committed these violations on a scale that is widespread and systematic and related to a state project, i.e. a crime against humanity. They also implied, that they didn't say outright, that because it was widespread, systematic, and ethnically targeted, that they might conclude that there was genocide. So I think the most important lesson from this is, here we have the United Nations experts saying, yes, all sides are responsible for abuses, but the type and scale of abuses is very different on one side to on the other. And that is enormously important, because quite clearly one side, and here, especially if we include Eritrea on that side, the federal government plus Eritrea, is intent on the crime of extermination against Tigrayans. And once we recognize that, it changes the moral and political imperative, and indeed the legal obligation on the international community.
Okay, if I come back to your second point, which is, if I just paraphrase here, the second problem is that military and diplomatic dynamic are not in synchrony. They are not going together. So my question is, right now, Obasanjo is heading to even to North America to meet with, according to what I heard, he will meet with in TPLF or whatever regional, the officials of TPLF. And what I'm trying that you'll give us a perspective is, do you think the AU, the European Union, the US, led by Mike Hammer, do you think they will achieve a lasting peace in that area? With their pressure, I mean, the economical right now, sorry to interrupt you, the economy is really bad and they will have a lot of leverage. And there is another group also, we'll talk at the end, if we have time, about the geopolitics that's going on and what's happening right now in Ukraine and all that area. We can put it in that context. But these two persons, Mike Hammer and Obasanjo, who is, you put it in your paper that he was a colonial in Biafra, he was one of those people who use it as a weaponize, So can you shed light on that?
As currently constituted, the African Union process supported by the United States, the UN, and the European Union is not going to succeed.
Okay.
And the fundamental reason it's not going to succeed is that the African Union set up its process. It's based in Addis Ababa. It is very vulnerable to arm twisting by the government of Ethiopia. President Obasanjo has made his own analysis, his own priorities perfectly clear. He was the one who, against the advice of everybody else in the international community, last year went and certified the election of Abiy Ahmed. So he became partisan from the get-go.
Okay.
And the Ethiopian government has initiated steps towards peace when it loses. When it is confident that it is going to prevail, either in the battlefield or through starvation, it slows down the process. And the African Union has gone along with that. Now, the other problem here is that if you are to set up a mediation, a conflict resolution process, rule number one is both sides have to agree on the mediator and the process. The Tigrayans have made it perfectly clear they do not trust Obasanjo. They do not trust the African Union. They're ready to go with an African Union-led process, but that does not mean they've agreed to Obasanjo or to any formula that the African Union decides. And a couple of days ago, General Tzadkan Gebretinsai of the Tigray Central Command made a public statement making that absolutely clear. Now, it may be that the Tigrayans diplomatically are the weaker side, but we all know that a peace process is going to fail if the mediator is not accepted by one side. And that should be the end of it. There should be no more discussion about that. They don't need to justify. They just need to say, we don't trust this guy. He should go. End of story.
Okay.
And so that's the number one reason why it's going to fail if it goes ahead as currently constituted. But the other reason is that the Ethiopian government and the Eritrean government, and the Eritreans are actually calling the shots at the moment. They're interested in succeeding.
Yes.
And the international community has not taken this to a sufficiently senior level, especially in the United States, where they can say, okay, we need a more serious, high-level intervention to stop this. Because at the moment they are just accepting the military logic presented to them by the government of Ethiopia, which is also speaking on behalf of Eritrea, which is, we are going to win, we are going to dictate the terms to Tigray. So you go along with that. And I concluded my article saying that, then the blood of Ethiopians will simply be the way of lubricating a diplomatic solution.
Yes.
But it will not actually be a diplomatic solution because it will fail.
Okay, first, we have just 4 minutes now. My last question is, if you can also first, please, talk about the rogue states of Horn of Africa, what we consider in French la bête noire, which is Isaias, who is really is a big spoiler there, and who, starving, his people and putting in problem. Even Abiy took, some of the, mechanized group and sent that, and right now even we talk about they are fighting there. This is violating Article 8 of Ethiopian Constitution, which is the nationality is invested in the territorial and the sovereignty of Ethiopia, as you put it nicely last time. So that is A. B is there is a geopolitics going on there. I know our time is limited, but can you please tell us your prediction? What is the way out from here with these 2 points, with the respect of time we have?
I think the key thing to understand is that between 1/3 and 1/2 of the fighting capability of the Ethiopian National Defense Forces is in Eritrea under the command of the Eritreans. And everything we know about the system in Eritrea means that once President Isaias has got his claws into that, he's not going to let go. So the idea that Abiy would say nicely to Isaias, please let us do our thing, is complete nonsense, utter naivety. And what this means is that until there is a tough action at a higher level than the current special envoys and Obasanjo, this war will continue until there is a military decision. Now, the military decision could be one of several things. It could be a military victory by Isaias and his now client, Abiy, in which case you would see Isaias as the dominant player in the entire Horn of Africa, with consequences for Somalia, for Sudan, etc. And he, of course, is aligned with Russia, so it has a geostrategic implication. Or we're going to see the collapse of Ethiopia and Eritrea, which is quite a likely scenario, the complete disintegration of the state system there. There is a chance for stepping in before it's too late, but that window of time is closing very, very fast.
Okay, Mr. Alex, thank you so much for your time, for your valuable time. I know you give us this valuable time, which is for us, we really appreciate it. And I hope we will see you another time, in the long run, and we will end our program at this level. And thank you so much again.
Thank you. You're very welcome. We will speak again soon.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye now.